Well, I want to say welcome. This is Andre Cohen. I look forward every week to meeting with you and hanging out with you as we discover how to be more effective in navigating conflict. And so I want to welcome all of you to the Mediator Cafe. This, I don't know about you, but this is probably one of my most favorite times of the week to. That I look forward to in terms of engaging in conversations about things that are meaningful. So, um, if you're new to this, we are Conflict Resolution Minnesota, and there are a number of ways that we engage with the community, and this is one of those ways. So I want to say thank you for all of you that are engaged in this conversation live, as well as those who will be watching it in its replay. So. Again, it's important to recognize that oftentimes we we're caught in an illusion of conflict in many ways, and so we'll kind of talk about that and address that in just a moment. I do want to remind us that currently we're in our membership drive, and that membership has its privileges, right? And so in our membership drive, our membership is $20, $60 annually. And that gives you discounts on our conferences. It gives you access to live webinars just like this one. It gives you access to training and conferences and mentoring and coaching. I mean, it really is access to practitioners and networks of practitioners who who know their stuff, right? And so I know that oftentimes I reach out to our membership to gain insight on a topic or an approach on a challenge that I'm having. And so, when we talk about this kind of mediation or conflict resolution space, there are tons of ways that manifests, right? So there's the social justice community, there's restorative justice community, there is the in the state of Minnesota, we have the Rule 114 neutrals, right? And then we have the kind of traditional mediation process. And so when we get those restorative justice folks together, those certified neutrals together, and we get our community mediators together, and we get our parents together and students together. There's a lot of dynamic things that happen in those networks. When we get our attorneys to sit in the room, right? So there are lots of perspectives that this community really does a wonderful job of integrating. And having conversations that help sharpen our skills, right? So the whetstone to your steel, right? The iron sharpens iron, whatever metaphor you want to use. I found that this community is a great one to engage in, a great community to learn from, and I'm really happy to be a part of this community. And it's funny that we consistently learn and we consistently grow, right? So for a while now, if you've been a part of these conversations or been watching these conversations, I've been using some imagery to really talk about the nature of conflict. And it was very interesting to me that I got some feedback on some of the iconography that we're using, some of the pieces of language that we were using. And so we made some augmentation to that, right? And so if you recall, this particular image originally was of a person that could have been perceived. These are all cartoons, right? So there's lots of iconography, but one that could be assumed to be male and one that could assume to be female. And interestingly enough, and I guess didn't think about it, but there seemed to be a positionality that was different. So I want to say thank you to the wisdom of the group for doing that. We also incorporated this illusion piece, and I don't know that I necessarily bought it, but if it is a barrier to people being able to engage in our materials, then we want to eliminate any of those barriers. And so there was an illusion that we used that actually had some social connotations that I hadn't thought about, that we stopped using, and so we went to this B and 13 model, right? So looking at those as opportunities to kind of be effective. And so it's this kind of community where we keep sharpening each other through communication and navigating through conflict. So really excited about that. But I do want to touch on this before we get away from it, particularly for those who haven't joined us before. And oftentimes the truth is in the middle, right? So when people engage in conflict, or they try to even engage in relationships, it's the third way that is oftentimes better than either one of their ways. And so when we think about this notion of resolving conflict, we have to recognize that the truth is in the middle. And so one person may see the letter B, and the other person may see a 13. Um, which is wrong, right? Which of those perspectives is wrong? I'm not sure. Which of those perspectives is right? Again, I'm not sure. So what determines our right and our wrongs? And I would say that it is our goals, our goal accomplishments, what we're trying to go after, right? And so that helps us to define those things. But when we think about some of our ground rules and agreements, what I encourage mediators to do, particularly when they're engaging and helping people navigate through conflict, is to keep focus on the goals, both as a mediator and as folks who are locked in this oftentimes perceived conflict, right? And so so that becomes important. It's also important to align your thoughts and your behaviors to your values. So making sure that we agree on the things that are non-negotiable, right? So in the case of neighbors having a dispute, one of the things that we both know is that we want to have a safe and both want to have a safe and clean environment, right? If that is the goals, and so if we can agree on that, then the other things is just about how do we get to that? How do we have this shared experience, recognizing that neither one of us are you know, may want to move at this point in time, right? So getting away from each other may not necessarily be an option. And so it's important to focus attention on the goals, as well as focusing on the goals and the activities themselves, right? So in that conversation, engaging in that conversation. Next, it's important to align thoughts and behaviors to those values. So if neighbors are in a dispute or in some kind of conflict, and they've agreed that neither one of them really wants to move, and that they both want to have a safe community, they both want to have a clean community, then we need to figure out how do we align our behaviors with those values, right? With those values of being of getting safety, significance, and belonging. And so, recognizing that we have common values, we can now negotiate through conflict how we get to those things. And so if my neighbor's leaves falling off of their tree because their branches over the fence line, and so I'm getting all these leaves, is causing me pain, then my neighbor and I need to have some conversations about how we get to what we both want, right? So they want a beautiful tree. I don't want the leaves. So it may seem like we're in conflict, but we're actually after very similar things, but it's our methods that differ. And so that's important. And so then we engage in this notion of it's important to engage in curiosity, to engage in curiosity, which is recognizing that we can discover these things together. These are things that we can discover together. Um, and and it's important to recognize that we can offer people what we need. we can offer people what it is that we need. And it's important to give grace to those folks who are in conflict, because we have been recipients of grace. All right, so recognizing that we have been recipients of grace is extremely important to recognize as well. And so when we think about this this notion of how we carry ourselves, this becomes important to recognize. So we'll continue on. I do want to again remind folks that we are in our membership drive, and we look forward to seeing how and when each of us comes into recognizing that we're not in this mediation or conflict resolution thing by ourselves, that we can come alongside folks and that we can learn in a community, excuse me, in a community that can be supportive. And so we look forward to seeing you as a part of our membership. I also recognize that just as a point of review, uh, we've talked about kind of diversity, we've talked about equity, we've talked about inclusion, we've talked about navigating conflict, right? And one of the things that we've also kind of talked about and navigated through is this concept or the conversation around context and their behaviors being related, right? So context and their behaviors are in fact related. And so, if an individual, if a mediator, if a navigator through conflict says, "I treat all my people the same," that on its surface sounds like it a good thing, when in fact, if we think about how that connects or relates to people, um, you can you can recognize that you can recognize that our context and our behaviors are connected, right? And so as I move from context to context, if I'm uh, trying to be effective, then I will augment or adjust or change my behavior according to the context that I'm in, right? And so as a part of the mediator cafe, we're talking about how do we resolve these conflicts. And so I want to say it's important to recognize that as we talk about this notion of context, that context and behaviors are related, and so I have to recognize the context that I'm in and adjust my behaviors to maximize my success in that context. All right, and so these two plants, as an example, this aloe vera and this cactus. May come from different contexts, but there's some universality to them, right? So they need water, they need sunlight. However, I may need to water my aloe vera from the bottom, where my cactus may need water from the top. Right? And so those are important things to recognize and engage. And so as we're in this process of mediation, we want to align our thoughts, our behaviors, our goals, and our actions. And so, part of the job of a mediator is to help people through navigate to ultimately get the result that they want, but to do that by closing gaps, right? So helping people to close gaps. And so when we align our intentions and our behaviors, we typically are able to get the kinds of results that we want, right? So here's an interesting thing. Oftentimes, people will say things or do things that they did not mean to, right? And they say, you know, I did this, but I meant to do this, right? And so when there is a gap between our behaviors and our intentions, there's an opportunity for us to grow. And when we think about this opportunity to grow, this is a way that we can kind of monitor or close or to develop in that gap, right, between our behaviors and our intentions. And that is by aligning our values, our goals, and our behaviors, right? First of all, what are our values? And I would recommend and I would suggest that most people want to live in peace. And I would say that peace is the absence of chaos. That peace is operating with a certain degree of certainty about your world, that is peaceful, right? Oftentimes people think war is the opposite of peace, and that may in fact be true. But I like to think of peace as actually being the absence of chaos, where things are somewhat predictable. I can count on things. I can be comfortable knowing, having psychological safety enough to recognize what that future holds because it's stable, it's not chaotic, right? And so when we think about our values, our values really help us to be in a place of peace because we recognize no matter what is going on outside of me, these are the things that define me, right? Or these are the things that I'm after. And so then we talk about, these goals. We'll get back to intentions and behaviors in just a second. But then we go to this concept of goals. And so what are my goals? And I would say Abraham Maslow would say that there are seven, goals as a part of his hierarchy, right? Uh, I know that Alfred Adler offers that there are three, that we're all looking for safety, we're all looking for significance, and we're all looking for belonging. And I would say at the basic level, that is absolutely true. That is absolutely what we're after, right? Is safety, significance, and belonging. And so when we think about how do we align those things as mediators, as navigators through conflict, it's our job to help people kind of align those intentions with their behaviors. And you've heard me say this before that for those of you who have joined us before, if you are not mindful, is it possible that you are mindless? Right? That you're operating without knowing why and what you're saying or the impacts of what you're doing, that your intentions, your values, and your goals are not aligned, right? Is that a possibility? Right. So there's that. So I want to say thank you for that. And again, I just want to say this is a part of our membership drive, and so we're open to building and growing our community through these outreach opportunities. And so it's $60 annually. And if you need a scholarship, please contact us. We don't want money to be a barrier to people participating in such a dynamic program. And so it's important that you support organizations just like this one. And so what are some tools? Because one of the things I've been promising, and we've been talking about this for a while, what are some tools that can help me become more effective in recognizing my own blind spots, my own shortfalls or frailty in my navigating skills and abilities. And so one tool that I would encourage you to use, and you can look this up online, there are tons of resources that you can either take the formal assessment or you can read some of these resources and just think about where you might fall on this continuum as it relates to operating and interacting with folks that you perceive to be different. right? And so when we think about this, there is a tool called the Intercultural Development Inventory, um, or the IDI, that is that's an important way to kind of think about operating and operating with and navigating through the some of the obstacles of of difference, right? So whether that difference be cultural, whether it be gender, whether it be religion, whether it be identity, all of those things are oftentimes some of those illusions that I've talked about, but have some very real consequences, have some very real emotions. There's very real data that comes out of those things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the scale that is oftentimes used in this intercultural development inventory. So um, so we'll start from the top to the bottom, and typically when people are looking at this IDI, we do recognize that it is a relationship between context and behaviors, right? So given where and how you grew up, who you grew up under, and the time in which you grew up, the geographic space, the country, all of those things have a huge impact on how you respond or how you interact around these so-called differences. And so when we think about the IDI, so the development inventory really is about an opportunity to grow and to change and to become more effective. And so one of the things that they suggest, and I agree with, is that oftentimes denial is probably the less effective way that folks come to an intercultural relationship to engage, right? And so the denial orientation is an orientation that recognizes more observable cultural differences like food and wardrobe and festivities, but may not understand deeper differences, right? And may avoid or withdraw from such differences. And so the folks who are in denial, it's not that they don't recognize differences, but oftentimes they want to, or in positions where they've not been taught to recognize those differences as A, just being different, or B, having some significance to the other party. People who are in this denial phase oftentimes feel that differences are a threat to them and their way of life. And so when we talk about this idea of denial of difference, we're talking about. And so next is this idea or the concept of polarization. And polarization really is this kind of either or, black or white. People are good or bad. You are right or wrong. You are left or you are right. You're my political party or you're the other political party. You're with me or you're not. It's either heaven or hell. Those kinds of things. And the interesting thing about this polarization is that it manifests itself in two ways. Polarization manifests itself, one, in saying that my culture is the best and their culture is the worst, right? My culture is right and their culture is wrong. So that's one manifestation of polarization. There's another manifestation of polarization that says or suggests or implies that my culture is so bad and their culture is so good, right? And I hope you can recognize the difference between those two, but they both have the same root, right? Which is not recognizing that the truth is in the middle. Right. So your culture isn't all bad, but there's some bad, there might be some ineffective things about your culture. Your culture isn't all good, but there may be some things that in your culture aren't as effective as something else. And so when we think about this, the notions of the IDI, I'm not sure that that right and wrong, good or bad, serves us in terms of being effective. I think the notion that we're either effective or ineffective helps us a lot more, particularly if we are aware and we are conscious of our goals, right? So that's important to realize as well. Um, and then we get into this notion of minimization. And minimization really is about highlighting our commonalities, right? It's about the universalness of human beings. And this is where you'll hear or you'll see people say, well, we are all human, right? Can't we just all get along? I don't see color. People are people to me. Now, all of those things are true. I would suggest that they are true. That yes, all humans are people, right? So that's important to take into account. However, what minimization does is that it minimizes all of that to this kind of universal place, and then we don't get to clearly define what might be some obstacles that our organizations are having, that challenges individuals are having given their context, right? And so we talked a little bit earlier about context and behaviors being connected. And so if I understand the context, then the behavior makes a whole lot more sense. But if I'm denying the absent, or I'm denying that context matters, or I'm denying that there are these important relationships, then I'm actually missing out on something that could help me problem solve. So by not seeing color, I'm not so sure that is as helpful as just recognizing that differences do exist, and that we're in a context that responds to those differences in a myriad of ways, right? So I think that's important to recognize about minimization. And then there is acceptance. This orientation recognizes that and appreciates patterns of cultural differences and commonalities in one and others' cultures. So this notion of acceptance recognizes I'm different, you're different, and we can be on the even playing field, right? That we're my culture isn't necessarily the right culture. It may be, in fact, be right for me, but that doesn't mean that I need to convert everyone to my culture, right? And recognizing that other people have other ways of getting to the same point that I do. So that's important. So this acceptance is really, and it's so funny that this is probably closer to the top of the scale, but this actually should be where we start. This should be the threshing floor, if you will, right? This should be the bottom of where we start, as opposed to oftentimes folks start with that minimization. And so when we get to this idea of adaptation, what an adaptation suggests is that this is an orientation that can shift cultural perspectives and change behaviors in culturally appropriate and authentic ways, right? And so what that means is I recognize the context and I can adjust my behavior so that I am effective at reaching my goals according to the environment that I'm in. Right. And so I can make those adjustments. And some people will say, well, does that make you fake? I don't know if it makes me a fake person or not. I'm more interested in being effective. Right. And so when we think about this intercultural development inventory model, this is one of the things that I use myself to become more effective and more engaging as I look to make sure that I'm being the best kind of person I can be. And so I'm constantly learning and evolving and growing and reading and listening and taking feedback from folks so that I can be more effective. Another tool I like to offer you is something referred to as the IAT, which is the Harvard Implicit Association test. And this test allows those who who participate or take that test to become critical thinkers about things that they typically haven't thought about. And so when you sign up for the test, I think there are now 16 different tests. Typically, when I'm working with groups, I encourage them to take the gender test, the race test, and maybe a religion test. Just so they have different perspectives. And but like I said, there are like 16, I believe, 12, 16. Can't remember. I have to go back and check. But at any rate, what this does is this oftentimes exposes us or exposes our blind spots in ways that we haven't really thought about. And it does it through an interesting way of word association versus motor skills, or with motor skills. And so they come up with this thing. And a lot of times, with these assessments, people say, well, that's not me. And I can't argue with that. I can't say that that is or is not you, right? I know that the Harvard implicit association test, they've done, almost millions of interviews at this point, and people taking the test over the last, I guess, probably 15 years or so. So, it's been meaned and normed and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't really want to get into like the validity of the thing. I think the thought process for me is probably more advantageous, in thinking about what if. So what if I have these blind spots? What if I have these areas where, just because of where I grew up and the time I grew up and who I grew up to, that I see the world in a way that is ineffective for what my goals are, right? What my values are. And so, really paying attention to those blind spots is important. And so this is a tool that can help you point out those blind spots. And so what do we know about blind spots in a car or vehicle? We know that as we change cars and vehicles, that not every car and vehicle has exactly the same blind spots. However, we do recognize that there are some commonalities, right? And so, to name those areas, right? So right over the shoulders, and sometimes it's in the quarter panel of the car, sometimes it's in the front of the car, and so recognizing that I have to look for those blind spots, things that I don't know exist, I have to search out, is an important concept, because if you don't want to, you won't. And so, that's important to recognize. So these blind spots, we have to look for them. We have to be active, or well, we can have accidents and people can tell us about what our blind spots are. They can point those out, right? And what we know about having a car accident is that it's a huge hassle, right? So I have to, contact my insurance agents. I have to, file a police report. I have to take the car in. So if we can avoid all of that by looking for our blind spots ahead of time, being mindful that there are gaps in our learning ahead of time, then we can be more effective. And as a matter of fact, in terms of being more effective, there is a class that you can take online right now that will help guide you through the IAT, the implicit association test, as well as give you some background information about things and you can do to illuminate and eliminate the negative impacts of your blind spots. Can we eradicate blind spots? I would say probably not, because they're a part of our human experience, right? Part of what it means to be human is to not know everything, but I do know some things, right? And so those things become important to recognize. And this course, if you scan this course, you can do it right on your phone. You don't have to sign up or anything. Will guide you through some conversations around what you can do with your unconscious or your blind spots, right? Your unconscious bias or your blind spots. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, part of our responsibility as human beings is to take cognitive control of our blind spots and our bias. Because whether I recognize it or not, I will be held accountable for those things that I know or that I don't know. I'll be held accountable to those things or for those things. And so when we think about this cognitive control is really developing self talk, is recognizing my emotional response, and is recognizing my behaviors, right? So I start to align those thoughts, those behaviors, and those emotions in ways that allow me to be effective, um, even in the face of a fear, right? So many people don't like spiders. Right. My thing is mice, and it's not the mouse itself; it's the fact that how it scurries. I don't. It's just something about that little movement that just gets unnerves me. Um, However, when I'm in high stakes situations, and I encounter a mouse, in I'm in a meeting in a place in a community building or someplace, and that happens, I don't want to lose my cool, right? Because I don't want to diminish the effectiveness of our meeting or the importance of what we're doing with my phobia. So how do I manage that? I think about what the goal is, right? I control my thinking. I engage my emotions. I feel that rush of adrenaline, um, but I make sure that that's in line with my behavior. So in some ways, I might get smart and start problem solving. Right, so I may, scoot my chair back from the spider or from the mouse or from the snake. I may, try to find a trash can in which we can capture this said rodent critter, right? I'm constantly being thoughtful. I'm constantly trying to maintain cognitive control so that I'm not behaving mindlessly, right? Remember when we talked about being mindful, aligning your intentions, your values, your goals with your behaviors? Very similar process, right? And so when we think about this cognitive control, this is the place where the rubber hits the road, right? And it's typically when we're in conflict, when we're not thoughtful, when we haven't had time to engage, that this is where we have to become self-actualized and self-aware enough to be able to kind of pause just for a second so that we can kick into this cognitive controlled behavior. So I do want to say again, thank you. This is a part of our membership drive. We are um, looking to build our community, build our organization, and I want to say thank you for each of your contributions, both in time and listening and developing with us. It's been absolutely amazing to be a part of this drive, and I look forward to doing more things in this community with you, our listeners, and in our engagement. So. The final call to action really simply is like, subscribe, all those things, but more importantly, continue the conversation, continue to think about conflict and how we can relate to each other in more effective ways. And so, with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We look forward to seeing who you become as we continue this conversation around how do we resolve conflict. This is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much. Goodbye.